sacred ground, if you will, members were on their feet to celebrate their decision to send another $60-odd billion to that charnel house. 500,000 human beings cold in the clay, $60 billion. We've learned to bandy these numbers around, like we understand them, like we can meaningfully visualise them. It would take a person 6 days of non-stop counting, day and night, to reach 500,000. To count as high as 1 billion would take a person 32 years. In this way, are we losing touch with meaning, including the meaning and, more importantly, the value of every human life? There in Congress, in that place sacred to patriots, elected representatives waved Ukrainian flags, a tide of blue and yellow, to show how pleased they were with their cash cow, a gift that keeps on giving. New Jersey Representative Bill Pascrell Jr. wore a flag as a cape around his shoulders. To describe that flag waving as a breach of protocol in that place is to put it mildly. Viewed from the outside, it looked like mockery of all that's decent. They were so happy, those elected representatives, and for reasons that make sense to warmongers, those reasons being dollars and cents. Just like the hundreds of billions of dollars already laundered through the tortured turf of Ukraine, the bulk of the latest unimaginable sum will end up where it began, in the US. What goes around comes around, all the way back to the bank accounts of the component parts of the intelligence military complex. The same is true of the pounds and euros and the rest of the currencies flowing like water through that benighted place, made to look like it's defending democracy, when in truth it has only ever been about enriching those who peddle and promote war for a living. Those sums leave those countries via the front door and return via the back door. On another note, I'm loath to ponder what they call little man syndrome, but if the little cap fits, I look at the leaders of Europe, Rishi Sunak, Olaf Scholz of Germany, Emmanuel Macron of France, Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, all of them excited by thoughts of war fought by other men's sons and daughters. And notice they all fit the bill of those exhibiting the Napoleon complex. Prime ministers and petit présidents, the lot of them. But all of them evidently have something to prove, and you know that for sure because the narrative is shifting under our feet, inexorably pulled by the lure of filthy lucre. Unelected, surely unelectable British Foreign Secretary David Cameron has already described the Russia-Ukraine war as good value for money, not least because it's the blood of other nations that's being spilled. Earlier this month, he stood alongside fellow warmonger Antony Blinken, US Secretary of State, and said, quote, "I argue that it is extremely good value for money for the United States and for others. Half of Russia's pre-war military equipment has been destroyed without the loss of a single American life." Well, that's all right then. Just dead Ukrainians and dead Russians. War is a racket, remember, said that most decorated of US Marines, Maverick Major General Smedley Butler, after 34 years in the belly of the beast. War is a racket, it always has been, he said. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. The long-ago line about defending democracy in Ukraine never held water for anyone with an inch of brain tissue above the shirt collar, but it's all but forgotten even by the career dafties now. Value for money has been the name of the game, moving the other team's pieces on the board, collecting £200, as we say when we play Monopoly, every time they pass go. Go to war, that is. Only it's a great deal more than £200 a time. So many billions made already, but discernible now is the need felt by the warmongers for a bolder, bloodier approach yet. Foreign Affairs, an American magazine about international relations and US foreign policy, published by the Council on Foreign Relations, carried a piece this month headlined, "Europe, but not NATO, should send troops to Ukraine." Quote, "A taboo has been broken in Europe. Only a few months ago, it would have been inconceivable for European leaders to propose sending European troops to Ukraine. But on February 26th, French President Emmanuel Macron said the deployment of European forces to Ukraine could not be ruled out. Since then, other European officials have joined the chorus. The Finnish Defence Minister and Polish Foreign Minister have both suggested that their country's forces could end up in Ukraine," end quote. Most recently, the excited, priapic talk from those homunculi of war in their platform shoes and tiny, tiny suits has been about a European army to join the fight. Last week in Warsaw, Sunak said he was putting the British defence industry on a war footing. He pledged £10 billion that his wife's family certainly has, but that we, the British taxpaying citizens, do not, for additional spending on munitions for Ukraine. Quote, "We will put the UK's own defence industry on a war footing. One of the central lessons of the war in Ukraine is that we need deeper stockpiles of munitions and for industry to be able to replenish them more quickly," end quote. He said that at a press conference alongside NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. Perhaps it won't be long before American, British, French and German pieces are brought out of the box, ready for being smashed to pieces in that place where it's allegedly generous lines of marching powder for those at the top and murderous battle lines for the rank and file. Are you angry yet? Are your teeth grinding with the knowledge none of us, not here in the UK, not in the US, nor our neighbours in Europe, were asked about any of this? Far less for our blessing for all that has been shipped abroad to the meat grinder. The spilled blood is everywhere, so too the rotting corpses from which it ran. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk was quoted last week saying he was horrified by reports of mass graves of hundreds of bodies at two of Gaza's largest hospitals. Israeli troops withdrew from the Nasser hospital complex in Khan Yunis and Palestinian civil defence teams moved in. The report I read said 310 bodies had been exhumed. Quote, "We feel the need to raise the alarm because clearly there have been multiple bodies discovered," said Ravina Shamdasani, spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She said the bodies were buried deep, covered over with waste, that among the dead were old people, women, those with wounds, some stripped and with their hands bound behind their backs. Everyone is blaming everyone else for the horror, but the dead are the dead. War's a racket, the oldest, the most profitable and most vicious, and there's no sign of its spread abating. Iran and Israel have been swapping ordnance, each backed by nuclear powers. Are you angry yet? Do you remember asking for any of this? It's no wonder silence is descending all over, questions and dissent throttled by one so-called government after another. In the same week Congress wrote that cheque for $60-odd billion, President Joe Biden signed off on a piece of legislation numbered 702, part of the FISA Act, massively expanding the power of the US states' intelligence agencies to spy on American citizens. Biden also made plain his intention to deny 170 million of his fellow Americans access to TikTok videos, awarding his administration the right to ban the app in the US unless its Chinese owner ByteDance agrees to sell it to a US corporate. Former US presidential hopeful Ron Paul, father of Senator Rand Paul, said in response, "When future historians go searching for the final nail in the US coffin, they may well settle on the date April 20th, 2024. On that day, Congress passed legislation to fund 2.5 wars, hand what's left of our privacy over to the CIA, the NSA, and give the US president the power to shut down whatever part of the internet he disagrees with. The US and its allies have already sent over $300 billion to Ukraine, and the country is still losing its war with Russia. Nobody believes another $60 billion will bring victory from the jaws of defeat, but this additional money is meant to keep up appearances until November at the expense of Americans who are forced to pay for it and Ukrainians who are forced to die for it. Are you angry yet? Other money, not only the $60 billion, but more to Israel and even to Taiwan. Did you know we were laying foundations for war with China? Are you angry that British sons and daughters may yet be sent to die in Ukraine, not in defence of democracy or in pursuit of any honourable goal, but to keep the money flowing into the same bank accounts, to keep the sacrificial blood flowing across the altars dedicated to the gods of war? Here's the thing, while the powerful keep us distracted with forever war, war for no gain except financial gain, they're also busily making plans to utterly transform our ways of life. The World Health Organization last week appeared to water down its own proposed changes to its pandemic treaty, but if experience has taught us anything, it's that it's not what they say that matters, it's what they actually do, what they actually intend. I say let's watch. Whether we have homes to call our own, what we can eat, whether we can travel, and whether we can ever again hold our own money in our own hands and decide how to spend it, how crops are grown, how and if we can heat our houses. The warmongers are making war, make no mistake, and the real enemy they have in their sights is us and our ways of life. They want to reduce carbon. I say that ultimately we are the carbon they want to reduce.
Yes, that was brilliant.
Oh, Ingrid.
Brilliant, brilliant. You always nail it, Neil.
But it's
I
just...
call you nail it, Neil.
Democracy. We were told the war in Ukraine was about defending democracy. But even our, well, unelected representatives, like Foreign Secretary David Cameron, are talking about war as an investment, pointing out to potential supporters that there's money to be made. Is that not morally bankrupt? Yes,
completely. Let me start a little bit with the sort of, it's in the name of democracy, this war with Ukraine. Just splitting hairs here, we didn't vote for that war. So it wasn't democratically approved from the very beginning. But going back to sort of your question about David Cameron, he's saying it's profitable. It's morally not. It's morally bankrupt, as you say. But when you look at the pound, shillings and pence, the dollar signs and everything, it is hugely profitable. All the arms... America is the largest exporter of arms, and Ukraine is the fourth largest importer. You know, it's not rocket science to work out sort of how convenient that is. We are, of course, and always have been, America's puppets, or, little poodly things. So that plays into all of that. So we're always going to agree with what they do.
But what chokes me is we all, well, anyone with any sense can work out that there's money to be made in war. War's a racket, as I quoted Smedley Butler saying. But it's the fact that they're now confident, our representatives, of saying as much. You know, all the highfalutin talk about, preserving democracy, fighting the good fight, fighting on the beaches or on the landing grounds. Yeah. All of that's just... Never mind about any of that. And never mind about you little people either.
But it's not now. It's a brainwashing, because we can't see and we don't get where it's going, apart from the fact that people do see, is that this is a war that can never be won. Ukraine will never be victorious in this, and all it's going to do is just going to provoke something larger and greater. You're prodding the bear, and actually, I get Putin's stance. I totally do.
But once you internalise, or once you invite the people to accept that it's a war for profit and a war for money, then why would you end the war? It'd be like curing a sick patient when you can continue to make money from prescribing them expensive medicines. Why would you bring to an end a war that's earning money, and when that is being touted as the reason for the war?
Because they're not putting it the way that you've just put it. That's why. The way you've put it is absolute common sense. Why? What is the point? But the way they package it, it's kind of playing into people just still trusting the government, still trusting our leaders, trusting David Cameron from the days that he was a Prime Minister. Now he's there, an ambassador. He's so well-dressed, he's so well-spoken. He must be right. You've packaged it the right way, and then people would question and go, no, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It makes me feel unclean.
Unclean, unsavoury, and it taints. It just taints everything.
It taints. We have to go to a break now, and after that break, I will be joined by former Army Colonel Douglas McGregor to ask him how much longer the war in Ukraine can possibly continue, regardless of profits. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News. Please don't go away.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Offline and overlooked. That's what Age UK say millions of British pensioners are. Why? Because they cannot or won't access the internet. It's leading to digital exclusion. So the charity's campaigning for public services like banks, utilities and even the NHS to maintain a more human approach.
Everything's online. People assume you've got a smartphone with a mobile number and an email, and without that you don't exist in this world anymore. We've got to try and get the government to see that it's so important to make people feel that they belong, because there's a feeling that the older generation just feel that they're forgotten, they're in the way, and we already know that anyway, but it's just another reason for them to feel that they're not wanted. They'll just accept it, and they'll say, well, that's it, I can't do it anymore. and that's it, whereas other people would be really kicking and screaming. So we need to be the voice for older people.
Despite digital technology playing an increasing role in our lives, around 1 in 5 over 65s in the UK don't use the internet. Thornycroft Centre in Pontefract, West Yorkshire, provides a space for this age group to socialise and get help to go online.
I'm not that good with mobiles, so when you mention anything about online, I ain't a clue what you're talking about.
The closure of thousands of banks is also detrimental to the older generation.
A lot of our members what come, they tend to use cash. They don't like to use bank cards. I think a lot of it's trust or the lack of knowledge. They don't understand how it works. I think they're very vulnerable as well with online. It's really important that they're aware how to use it and how to use it safely.
So, in an online era, it's still crucial for many to have an offline option.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. The new $61 billion US aid package for Ukraine, approved by Congress on the 23rd of April, will improve, we are told, Ukraine's battlefield position, allowing stocks of ammunition from US bases in Poland and Germany to be shipped quickly to existing Ukrainian forces and newly mobilised troops to be equipped. But what does it really signal to the world? Joining me now is retired US Colonel Douglas McGregor. Thank you for joining us, Colonel.
Happy to be here.
Colonel, what did you make of the scenes in the House as the Ukrainian flags were waved in apparent celebration of signing the cheque to Ukraine yet again?
Well, I don't think they were really waving flags for Ukraine. They were expressing their gratitude to donors who will reward them for voting for this terrible bill. Probably 60 to 70% of the cash will never reach Ukraine. It'll end up being circulated through the giant laundering machine here in Washington that moves funds to the Department of Defense, from the Department of Defense to military industrial production, to clients, donors, and then eventually parts of it end up back on the Hill in people's reelection funds. So you have to understand that most of this isn't going to have any impact whatsoever on the battlefield in Ukraine. Of course, the Ukrainians are running out of soldiers at this point. They're losing about 500 to 800 Ukrainian soldiers a day, and the Russian offensive hasn't really begun yet. So the place is nearing collapse. But I guess the point is to try and conceal from the American public and from the rest of the world yet again the immense failure of this policy of proxy war with Russia and Ukraine.
How did we get to this point? I mean, I think, those of us that are old enough and ugly enough, we've realised that there's money to be made in a time of war, but that it's so naked now, that it's being pushed now almost as the point of the war in Ukraine. How have we, evolved, if that's the right word, to such a morally bankrupt state of affairs?
Well, I can't speak for what the population or the electorate is like in Great Britain, but here in the United States, I think large numbers of Americans have been very complacent. And by complacency, I mean haven't taken much interest in foreign and defense policy. The average American thinks that if you spend $1 on defense, you get $1 of national security at the other end of the process. That, of course, is nonsense. And they don't have a real feel for how many billions of dollars are wasted on a daily basis by the Department of Defense, or for that matter, by the government. Americans are beginning to figure out that they have no representation in Washington, that the parties are irrelevant. We are supposedly governed at the behest of two parties, but in truth, we have one party. It's called the Uniparty, which is why there were only 21 Republicans who refused to support the bill. So there is no representation. Americans are beginning to figure it out, but there are still Americans who think that the coming election could change something. And you would think by now they would have figured out that it doesn't make much difference who you vote for, you get the same bad outcome.
It feels as though finally the emperor, in the form of the US, is being exposed as wearing no clothes. We've always been sold this idea of the invincibility of the US war machine, and clearly the way events have unfolded in Ukraine must be making it clear even to the most patriotic American that those days are over.
No, I don't think so. I think that there's a great deal of effort made in Washington, D.C. to create the illusion that we are still the great power of 1990 and 91. Now, there are plenty of intelligent Americans who can look around inside our country and realize that the breakdown in the rule of law, the massive invasion of foreigners that no one invited and no one wants, that's evidence for a collapse inside the country. They can see what's happening on the border. So that if you ask the average American, what's your top priority, what do you want to happen immediately, number one is close the border and restore the rule of law. Foreign and defense policy is frankly way down the list. It always has been. If you go back through the 20th century and look at polling data from, say, 1910 right up through the 1990s, Americans were almost always at least 60 to 70% opposed to the use of American military power overseas, especially interventions designed to export our culture and way of life at gunpoint. So that's never been popular. But Americans have entrusted the funding and decision-making to people they thought represented them. Now it's becoming increasingly clear, though not entirely yet, that that's not the case.
Earlier in the show, Colonel, I mentioned the British Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, speaking relatively recently about the war in Ukraine being great value for money, which is a form of words and an attitude that troubles me profoundly. I'll just play the clip, and I'd like to hear your reaction to the tone.
We know that it is right to stop Putin's aggression. We know it's right for our own militaries and our own production bases to ramp up production, not just for Ukraine, but for our own stocks. And as Tony said, so many of the jobs created will be jobs created here in the United States, and indeed, when we're dealing with our own weapon systems, jobs in the UK.
So war is value for money. War is an investment for those who seek to make money. How did we get here?
Well, it goes back to the narrative. Who are the people that had spun this narrative that one day President Putin woke up in the Kremlin and decided that it was a great idea to attack Ukraine? That's a lot of nonsense. We've been working, certainly for the last 10, some people would argue for the last 20 years, to provoke the Russians, to push them into doing exactly what they did. And then they said, well, this was always part of the plan. Well, if it was part of the plan, the Russian army that first entered Ukraine was quite small for the task it had been assigned. And that task was not to go very far, but to try and signal to the West, to NATO, that they were quite serious about not tolerating a threat in Ukraine directed at Russia. Well, when that didn't work and attempts to negotiate with us failed, they built this enormous force. They now have arguably the best, largest, most lethal, battle-tested, battle-hardened ground and air force in the world.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end to the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just one or two showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections, we'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. The next topic is the World Health Organization, specifically the apparent climb down in recent days when it comes to their plans for a pandemic preparedness treaty. To hear more about it, we go to Molly. Molly, are you there?
I am here.
Oh, lovely to see you.
You too.
Be honest, Molly, I know what this sounds like. Are you persuaded that the mighty World Health Organization have actually backed down, or are they just pulling back to think again?
I don't know what the intention is. I don't think we can impute any particular intention. What we see is what is in front of us. And I would make 2 key points here. The first is that on any measure, reading from a legal perspective, the new draft represents a really significant climb down on a number of key issues that I know, Neil, you and I have talked about many, many times. But, there were probably 6 or 7 really egregious examples of overreach by the World Health Organization. And in pretty much every case, they have either been deleted or watered down entirely. So from that point of view, I think this should be treated as, something of a victory. However, it's important to remember that these amendments to the international health regulations were only ever intended to strengthen an existing health architecture. So that underlying health architecture remains. It will still be strengthened to an extent, just not as to the extent to which the World Health Organization were proposing a year and a half ago. And of course, all the underlying problems, and there are many, and we've talked about this many times before, haven't we, Neil? But all the underlying problems with the World Health Organization, it's very conflicted funding status, it's just ineptitude during COVID. All of those issues remain.
What about, though, a lot of the problem, a lot of the anxiety for people like you, people like me, was this going from non-binding to something that certainly seemed to be binding, that member states were going to surrender national sovereignty and hand over wholesale decision-making powers to an unelected body. Is that still there, or is that out?
That is out. And let me just take you through the kind of key details, because the devil is in the detail. And I think there's been a lot of confusion about this on social media in the last few days. So, let's be clear, that provision that was found in a new Article 13A, it would have turned the WHO's ability to make advisory recommendations only into effectively binding mandate that would require states to comply. And there was a whole compliance architecture built around that the compliance architecture is still there, but crucially, the WHO's recommendations will remain just that from a legal point of view. Now, of course, some commentators have pointed out that in practical terms, some states, particularly states in less developed countries, may consider themselves bound to comply with the WHO's recommendations anyway, and I think that is a fair point. The other, just touch on two other points that I think are really material climb downs by the WHO. One is, another provision that we're all deeply shocked by, really, was in the draft that was released a year and a half ago, a reference to the primacy of dignity, human rights and fundamental freedoms was deleted. I mean, it was literally struck out. That deletion has been dropped. So, dignity, human rights and freedom still prevail by the looks of it. And then the other thing that I think is very significant is in the original draft, the WHO had, attempted to claim for itself powers as a global censorship agency and to give itself, vast surveillance and censorship powers. They have largely, not entirely, but they have largely been dropped.
Why, Molly, wasn't there a response from anyone, really, and certainly our government, saying, who do you think you are? I could not believe that an unelected body, broadly funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and all of the rest of it, was suggesting, taking for itself this kind of decision-making power, this kind of sovereignty, and back here, there was a deafening silence, except from those of us who said, just a cotton-picking minute.
I mean, it was incredible, and I think, like you, Neil, when I first read those documents, I'm a lawyer and we had obviously a team of lawyers looking at it. We just couldn't believe it. They were egregious documents of the type that you almost had to rub your eyes in disbelief to see. And I think it leaves massive questions. Perhaps the immediate threat has subsided a bit. Of course, it's really important to state this is only an interim draft. So the final meetings on this draft are still going on. So, let's see how much of it sticks. Assuming it stays as it is, some of the most egregious provisions have been dropped, sure, but I think the intentions of the WHO, and in particular its Director General, Ghebreyesus Tedros, it just speaks to a lack of transparency, accountability, and I think some of us would suggest that they have behaved in a wholly duplicitous way. It's been quite horrifying to watch.
Molly, I'm just going to pause to read a statement from the World Health Organization, just to keep the playing field level. Pandemics and large-scale outbreaks can claim millions of lives, disrupt societies and devastate economies. WHO's Health Emergencies Programme is working with member states to help countries prepare for large-scale outbreaks and pandemics. Through the Asia-Pacific Strategy for Emerging Diseases and Public Health Emergencies, core capacities required by the International Health Regulations, or IHR, MHR are being advanced, providing an important foundation for pandemic preparedness. This is complemented by efforts to strengthen disease-specific systems and capacities, including for vaccines, pharmaceuticals and other public health interventions. Countries are also encouraged to engage the whole of society for effective pandemic preparedness and response. As the next pandemic is most likely to be caused by influenza, the disease continues to be the priority public health threat in the region. WHE continues to work with member states to strengthen prevention, surveillance and response capacities for seasonal and zoonotic influenza with pandemic potential. Goodness me. Ingrid, how did you respond when news reached you, whenever it did, of what the WHO had in mind when it came to taking away our sovereignty and making it their own?
Well, immediately it was, they are not doing anything in our best interest at all. It's all about them. It is a mass control. There is no accountability. There isn't the transparency that we need. I don't trust them one little bit, and I just wish that we had our own, we do have our own health system here, and we just stick to that. Because, as you say, or it was you that said, I can't remember if it was you or Molly, Bill Gates and the foundation, Melinda Bill Gates Foundation, everything, people like that, you know, the ones with a lot of money, I'm not going to name other names just in case, but we do know that Bill and Melinda Gates are in there. It all... You know, call me a conspiracy theory, I don't think I am. It plays all into that. This is all about controlling absolutely everything. And if you don't comply, and it starts with the medicine, the vaccine, then you're going to do the lockdown. You'll be restricted. You won't be able to travel. You won't be able to do this and that. And all your freedoms and liberties will be taken away. So it stinks.
Sinister again, to quote again, Colonel Douglas MacGregor on another topic. That, believe it or not, is the first hour of the Neil Oliver Show, but we will be continuing this very important discussion as well as bringing you much more comment and content. Keep watching by going to gbnews.com.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
King Charles is well known for his views on climate change, and apparently he's now taking steps to make sure that his Sandringham estate is more eco-friendly. Well, it's being reported that the King is planning to have 2,000 solar panels installed on that estate, and it's set to make the estate largely self-sufficient with a supply of its own green electricity. Well, joining me now is former Royal correspondent, the absolute legend, that is Michael Cole. Michael, twice in 2 days I feel blessed. Look, King Charles has long been talking up his eco-credentials. Some may uncharitably compare him to Greta Thunberg in a tweed suit. It's one thing, however, to be self-sufficient in energy, but got to be said, solar panel farms, they're hardly eco-friendly, are they? They destroy environments. What's your take?
I certainly agree with that. The King has indeed, as you say, Martin, and good afternoon to you, applied for planning permission. Now, this is going to be a bit of a mini solar farm, 2,000 solar panels on a site of 2 hectares. And as he has the Sandringham estate, 20,000 acres, 4 acres isn't going to be very much, and it's nowhere near where he lives at Sandringham House. Now, these things, which we're seeing on the screen, are hugely controversial up here. A monster one is being planned on the borders between Suffolk and Cambridge, and the people there really despise it. As they say quite rightly, is this grade A agricultural land being turned over to this semi-industrial use and spoiling the look of the countryside and changing it in a negative way.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Final item tonight is about the chance discovery of a human jawbone in a kitchen floor tile. And if that sounds unbelievable and incredible, you're probably right. I think a lot about the present condition we find ourselves in. We're so preoccupied, so anxious, we worry about everything around us. But every now and again, you have to pause and contemplate, in a million years' time, what will any of this matter? And to be confronted with the possibility that all might survive of us, if we're very lucky, in a million years' time, is the chance discovery of a little bit of us. I remember reading some years ago that the process of fossilization is so unlikely that if the population of the United States of America, about 340 million people, if they were all to die in the same moment, you would expect to find fossilised perhaps 1/4 of one of those bodies. So unlikely that anything of any of us will ever see the light of day again after we are gone. So to be confronted with the image of a human jawbone in a million-year-old piece of stone, well, it fairly reset my clock for me. My next guest tonight, Dr. Angelique Cortals, says that it probably belonged to some or other version of humanity. Perhaps an extinct hominin like Homo erectus or Homo neanderthalensis, which would make it anywhere between tens of thousands and maybe 1 or 2 million years old. She joins me now. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
First of all, Angelique, do you think this is real? Is it truly what it seems to be?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's unusual. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility because such finds have been made before, but it's definitely an unusual find.
Can you explain how it might have come to be where it is now? You know, I've teed this up by saying it's in a kitchen floor tile, but how could that possibly have happened?
Right. Well, so the travertine stone is actually very prized for decoration and especially for floors. In fact, it is actually prized because embedded in a lot of that stone are fossils. Now, most of the fossils that we find are impressions of plants or impressions of invertebrates. So it's fairly unusual to see a vertebrate, and particularly an hominin fossil embedded in the travertine stone. But there's actually a museum in Los Angeles, the Getty Museum, that prized that particular stone just for its fossils so that the public can see the fossil embedded in the walls that are decorated with it.
And when you, as an expert, consider its morphology, you know, where you examine it as such as you can by looking at images, what kind of humanity might it represent? What kind of hominin?
Right. So, you know, it's very difficult because the images that I've seen are only the images that have been circulating into the press. But as far as I can tell, the angle of the jaw, that is the spread of the jaw, or the width of the jaw, seems to indicate that it is not a fully formed Homo sapiens, and therefore it could be our earliest ancestors, such as Homo erectus. Not entirely sure near the Neanderthals, but the Homo heidelbergensis, which is harder to say, can also be a very good candidate. Not just because of the width, but also because of the robustness of the jaw itself.
What would have been the terrain, let's say, that would have been inhabited by Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus? What kind of world can we place such individuals in our mind's eye? What kind of world?
You have to imagine a world that's very much like, one of the big national parks in the United States. So wild, right? Much more forested than we have now. And depending on where the stone comes, I believe the stone comes from Turkey. So in that respect, you have to imagine the great power sources of, or at least the great supervolcano of Yellowstone, not because of the volcano part, but actually because of the geyser part, which produces the kind of phenomenon that will eventually transform an area into travertine stone.
So travertine stone, am I right in thinking it's a kind of limestone, something that's laid down as thin layers of sediment that over extended periods of geological time, become thick layers of rock?
That is correct, and that's usually actually produced by geyser-like or spring-like areas where the water comes out to the surface of the ground, and the CO2 that maintain the limestone dissolved into the water becomes calcified. The CO2 evaporates, the limestone recalcifies and forms this hard surface. And that's actually something that you find a lot, particularly a lot in Turkey, where this specimen seems to be coming from, as well as the regions of Germany, which have also actually produced other hominin fossils.
Ingrid Tarrant, I mean, these are quite complicated chemical and geological processes that the doctor's describing there, but just in simple terms, to be confronted there with an image of a 1,000,000-year-old, perhaps, ancestor,
on your kitchen floor,
a relative of ours that after 1,000,000 years becomes part of a kitchen floor. How do you begin to contemplate that?
Honestly, it is mind-boggling, and the chances of it being there, and actually so almost complete. That my immediate thought, isn't it so dreadful? I was thinking, when we go, yes, wouldn't it be nice 1,000,000 years later that somebody comes across us, but none of us would probably have any teeth. It'll just be a jawbone because our teeth are so rotten because they had good diets in those days. That was my first thought. I think it's very exciting.
It resets the clock, doesn't it? When you're made to contemplate the fact that 1,000,000 years ago there were people of a sort, not our species, but cousins of humanity, up and walking about, in this case, in the territory we know as Turkey.
Well, it's the kind of going back to all the Darwin theories and everything. It's fascinating. It ignites all those thoughts, the Darwinism and Neanderthal man, Homo sapiens, and all that sort of thing, And I sort of like see the stages of the ape to man, It's super exciting, but it has got. I was reading about it, and it's quite long, which suggests that sort of like it was really very early, just at that cusp.
Yes, Dr. Angelique.
Yes.
You're a scientist, and you're approaching this from a very scientific and a very analytical place. How does it make you feel, though? When you're confronted by this particular specimen.
Well, first of all, it's an incredible chance that, it was excavated and that it was found, because most of the time this, you're not going to find something of that caliber in a stone that will eventually be processed into a visible specimen. But and just to requalify a little bit about the rotten teeth part that you've just mentioned. Like the reason why we're getting these specimens is not, it's not the reason why the specimen has its teeth, and the reason why we are finding a lot of fossils with teeth of hominin is not actually because of their great diet. It's because they died young. So this is something that's always been my pet peeve with people describing the paleo diet and things like that as being better than others, such as eat meat and rather than eating anything else, because our ancestors lived so much more healthily. That's not the case at all. They just died younger. And so the reason why we are privileged to die with rotten teeth is because we die so much older. Right?
Yeah.
But another point to make on this is that we are also making a discovery like this is incredibly unusual to get to the point where that specimen is going to be visible and be observed by people. Most of the time, either the specimen would be discarded without noticing that it was anything at all unusual because of cracks, or it would be hidden in between layers of sediments.
Wonderful stuff, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us to bring your expertise and to bring that specimen back to life, so to speak. But honestly, Ingrid, that a person might die and in a million years would be a jawbone on a kitchen floor. I don't know. It just stops me in my tracks. That's all we've got time for this week. You've been watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News. Thanks as always for watching. Thanks for joining me, and thank you, Ingrid, for being here throughout.
Thank you for inviting me. I've loved it.
A whole range there, a whole range with palate cleansers in between. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again, and I hope to see all of you next week.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end of the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just one or two showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh my God, are you joking? You're joking. Really? Seriously, it's not a wine, what is it? Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories this hour. The Shadow Health Secretary says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect from the Tory party to Labour. Wes Streeting is defending Dr Poulter's decision, saying it shows only Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted with the NHS. Dr Poulter says he'll sit on the Labour benches until the next general election and then stand down. Comes just days before local elections across England and Wales. And the Prime Minister this morning refused to rule out a general election in July. Wes Streeting says Dr Poulter defected to save the NHS.
There will be millions of people, disaffected Conservative voters like Dan Poulter out there, who can see the chaos in the Conservative Party, see the failure to deliver, and are looking at the alternative. And I'd ask those people to trust the doctor, who's seen the Conservative Party up close.
Well, that's the Labour view. Policing Minister Chris Philp is defending the government's handling of the NHS, pointing to record levels of spending.
Just in the last year alone, the NHS has grown by 68,000 staff, and there are today 7,000 more doctors and 21,000 more nurses than there were a year ago. And tens of thousands of people each year are fleeing the Welsh-run the Labour-run NHS in Wales to have treatment in England.
Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick is calling for a cap on net migration, saying it's the only way to restore voters' trust. Mr Jenrick says he wants a far more restrictive system, allowing less than 100,000 people a year. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he said the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration.
Last 30 years, politicians of all stripes have promised controlled and reduced